So one of the things that I do with ChatGPT these days, other than get really frustrated with it when I try to ask it to do something I really kind of need, is I'll try to ask kind of questions that, I don't know the answer to, and just sort of curious questions. So one question I asked yesterday was, why is it that some sounds qualify as what we'll call music while many others don't, right? Like, what is it about music that we find appealing, like those particular combinations of sounds? And ChatGPT's answer was basically, well, there's a mathematical structure that they have, and oftentimes they fit the golden ratio, or there's like a symmetry inside it. I'm like, that's interesting, right? Not shocking because I can sense it with music, right? There is a structure to it.
Mhm.
And then our brains are basically built to find that appealing, right, on some level. And so that's why we like that, right? That resonates with us. And then I started asking, like, okay, so is there any evidence then that meditation mantras follow some sort of structure,
Yeah,
right? Like this? Because in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, different mantras are intended to accomplish different things,
yeah.
right? And so it matters what you say, not just that you repeat it a lot of times. And so then I was like, I wonder if the mathematical structure of these things are almost like buttons that you push that activate it in different parts of our brain, right? Um, and it couldn't quite get to saying conclusively for sure that was the case, but it was like, yeah, that's definitely possible, right? So why do I say this? The hero's journey, the fact that we don't seem to get tired of watching basically the same story told our entire lives, right? At no point have I ever heard any human being ever say when they finish watching a movie or finish reading a book that's essentially a hero's journey, say like, I can't believe I've like wasted all this time watching this hero's journey yet again, right? Nobody
Yeah.
ever says this. And I wonder if that's because the hero's journey, again, follows a certain type of structure that we find appealing, right, on some level. That's why we gravitate towards that version of a story, the same way we gravitate to certain sounds with music and maybe certain types of meditation mantras to accomplish certain things, right? That maybe we're sort of
Hmm.
wired in a certain way. And that's an interesting sort of take, I think, on this, because you're right, so much of the content, if not, I mean, what percentage would you say, Davis, of what we see out there is hero's journey, or would you qualify as that?
I think it has to do with perspective because, like, from my perspective, all of it. But
Yeah,
I
that would be
don't,
my answer.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that would be my answer, except for the very odd sort of experimental film, right? Or the edgy stuff, which is trying to break that, probably because they're so sick of making the same story over and over again. I would say essentially that's probably virtually all content.
but that's why I said it matters about perspective because then it's like, okay, on a meta level, then that what you just described is someone's hero's journey. Is it's like I want to come out with this art film that does not follow a plot, that does not have real characters or anything like that. And it's like, oh, okay, so then that's an art piece. But then if you look at it, someone went out on their own hero's journey in order to produce this thing that was fighting their monster, and their monster is probably formulaic art or something along those lines. So it's
Yep.
I think you can get down to the hero's journey and almost like I said, from my perspective, you can get down to the hero's journey in just about anything.
Yeah. That's an interesting way. So we're talking about two different things in some sense, right? You're almost talking about the next level, right? Like I can take a look at the prevalence of the hero's journey. The same way that someone could look at all music and say, I am so sick of us doing the same chords over and over again. I'm going to make
Yeah,
something completely different.
so I'm gonna be Yoko Ono at a at some sort of an art festival and just scream into a microphone. That's her version of a hero's journey as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, yeah. The only thing I'll say to that though is that as interesting as those moments are, they don't ever seem to overtake the mainstream demand for just the plain old hero's journey,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Same with music, right? We still seem to like the same stuff, so we're wired in a certain way. One could argue, right, that we're just sort of built to find certain things more appealing than others. But I had never, it's one thing if we talk about certain sounds, right, or mantras, if you will, because that we can kind of imagine as being pretty close to the physiology, right? Your brain might activate in different ways, and maybe there's a mathematical structure to that. I had never thought about that in terms of story structure, though, right? Like a hero's journey. But that makes sense when you say it, right? The way
That's
we think.
it's I and listen, I don't know how weird you want this conversation to get, so feel free to rein me back when I need it. But so you and I both, I think, use ChatGPT in interesting ways. I mean, probably everybody uses it in their own interesting way, but when you said, it's like you like to ask ChatGPT questions that you haven't found answers to, and then you kind of like explore the answers and you dig deeper and deeper and deeper. I do something very similar. But the funny thing is, I see a lot like on LinkedIn and in some articles about this, is it's just like reminding us that, ChatGPT is not sentient. It is a probabilistic model, which I don't believe fully, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think that I'm not sure that anybody fully understands how ChatGPT works. I think that it's really, really interesting that the closest thing to synthetic intelligence or sentience or whatever you want to call it that we've been able to create has been through training a system on stories. That it hasn't been rules based, it hasn't been anything else based. It's been training it through essentially narratives. And to me, that makes a little bit of sense. And if you want to get into it, we can. But the I've seen some people try to discount it and say, like, no, listen, you can't trust it because it's a probabilistic model, it's a rules-based algorithm, and it exists within this world of math. And then I think about what our life is, and what you were just saying about how, you can define music or you can explain why music resonates based on mathematical constants or, the golden ratio, mathematical rules. And then you think about physics, which is essentially it's like we can define the laws of this universe via math. So why then do we discount ChatGPT or artificial intelligence's rules because they're math based? Because as far as I'm concerned, like I'm good enough at math in order to confuse myself, but not good enough at math to get myself out of that confusion. All of life seems to be ruled by these beautiful and very interesting equations and rules that are all math based, and ChatGPT and artificial intelligence seems to be just one further continuation of the rules that govern us. So, and like I said, like if that didn't make any sense, I apologize, but it's like I said, I'm not good enough at math in order to fully understand what I'm saying, but I understand enough of it in order to be able to like tinker with these ideas. So I think that just in general is not a fully palatable explanation on why ChatGPT can't be looked at as uh, a little bit more of a philosophical companion or something like that. And I think that a lot of how humans learn how to live in my opinion, this is the first time in life that we've been given, or the first time in human history, as far as I'm concerned, that we've been given the chance to ask any question to something that will give us an answer. I think that that's what a lot of people pursue via religion. I think that in a way that's a lot of people's definition of God is this invisible thing up there that I don't fully understand, but I can ask questions to, and depending on what your belief structure is, I will get answers back. Now we have this thing on our computers that we can ask anything to, and it will do as good of a job as humanly possible to give us answers back. And whether or not it's rules based doesn't change. I don't think it changes the validity of the answers.
Okay, so this is a very interesting set of things that you've just mentioned. I want to start with actually something you said in the very beginning of that. I just want to verify this with you. ChatGPT is trained on stories, not rules. Is that what you said? And what do you mean by that when you said that? Because I'm not familiar with how it was trained.
So someone about a decade ago had this idea of it's like, what if we take one of these artificial intelligence systems and just feed as many narratives into it as humanly possible. And that was essentially like the starting node or the starting idea for ChatGPT. So I'm not too sure what the actual mathematical and probabilistic rules are, but what they fed into the system was, I'm not too sure the number, but it was something like 60,000 unpublished manuscripts. And that formed the basis. That what's the actual term for it? I forget what the term is, but that like formed the basis of this machine's knowledge.
Huh. Okay. So I'm trying to think about this abstractly for a second. I've never actually thought about this. What is a story if you're going to try to train on it? It's
This is
essentially a,
tricky to It's
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but this is tricky to do on this recording because I mean, these are complex topics. Neither one of us are experts in artificial intelligence, but but we can we can work through it. I'm definitely game to work through it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, to the extent that we can figure, so a story is essentially like a chain of events, right?
Hmm.
So when someone tells you a story, there's a certain logical flow, right, of cause and effect that takes place. There are certain boundary spaces of one event leading to another, right? A story can make no sense at all, I suppose, but in order for a story to make sense, point A leads to point B to point C, and points B and C can be wild, but they can't be wild in a way that you can't understand, right? So this is I think I can sort of see why training on this would be helpful because it would tell you something about constraints of how things are linked together in the world, right? If you use time as kind of like the thing that's changing, right? How does A
Hmm.
lead to B, for example? And many things that we would ask ChatGPT are essentially either some version of a forecast, right? Or analysis based on history, where we are trying to find the causal relationship between A and B, right? Whatever those things are. So these are really, really frequent questions that we would ask as humans, right? If we're not just even when we look something up, oftentimes it's implicitly an A and B relationship that we're
Hmm.
asking about, right? And implicitly a causal one is what we're going after, right? Because if it's not causal, then it's way less interesting. Um, so I can see why a story would actually make sense then as a broad guide. If you're going to get asked, 30 trillion times or whatever it is, a bunch of questions about the causality of variables A and B, feeding a bunch of stories as the training data set would actually make sense because that might be more efficient as a heuristic than to literally try to give all of the historical A and B relationships for all things, right? Which would be the next thing you would do, but that's an enormous lift. Not clear how well it generalizes, and the stories are sort of like a short form kind of way of getting an approximation, right?
Hmm.
Maybe I'm making this up as I go, but I can kind of see that would make sense. Um, but then I feel like I heard you say that you thought that this might actually be more intelligent than just something like a really sophisticated algorithmic Google search, for example.
Hmm.
Um, so where I get lost on that one is when I ask it really simple things, it does a terrible job,
Yeah.
frankly, right? At a rate, when I say terrible job, meaning if I were to run that up against a human, it's how would I describe it? It's like a really bad undergraduate research assistant. I would say this is a professor, right? Like one that I would
Yeah.
not want to use, one that I would probably fire, right? Because it's just not worth my time. But it just turns out it's an AI, so I just prompt it again and hope that I get a better version of the answer. Or with enough patience, I might still get there, right? And so, but it doesn't. If you're seeing signs of intelligence, I'm not seeing a whole heck of a lot from ChatGPT in that regard.
So maybe this is yeah, it's funny how things connect, but I wouldn't ever get ChatGPT to book my next flight. I but I would tell it a story as far as what I'm looking for because I did an experiment. I don't know if we talked before or after this, but I did an experiment where I was in Denmark and I was like in a cabin by myself, like in the north of Denmark, just like staring into the abyss. And I was like, I really, really like this, but it's not cold enough. I need it to be like a little bit more rugged and a little bit more. I need like a little bit, I need to be a little bit more afraid for what I'm trying to work through right now. So I talked to ChatGPT about that, and it gave me like three recommendations of where I could go. And I went, you know what, screw it. I'm going to do an experiment right now. I am going to essentially ask it to write me a hero's journey, and I'm going to go and live that hero's journey. And it sent me to northern Iceland. So I ended up like flying into Reykjavik from Denmark. I rented a car and I drove around all of Iceland, but I stayed in Husavik, which is at the like the topmost point. Um, I think for like a week or something like that, and I had it build me out things to do every single day. And it it was interesting, and I'm almost like embarrassed to admit this, but it was like one of the things was drive to the northmost point, which is like you drive on a paved highway, and then it turns into a gravel road, and then you pass like four different sheep farms, and then you have to park because there's a lighthouse that's like an hour walk north from this point, and that lighthouse is the northernmost point of Iceland. And it was like go there and scream your name into the ocean and listen for something to come back. And so it was like weird stuff like that. It wasn't just like, oh, go to this waterfall and then, take a take a selfie, put it on social media, and then go, get on with your day or something like that. So I let it create a hero's journey for me, and I followed it almost to the T. And it was honestly incredible. It had some hallucinations where it was like it told me that, oh, take an afternoon drive to this place, but that drive would have taken me, you know, like 11 hours there and 11 hours back. And so I had to massage it and really ask for things. But from like a more weird slash philosophical slash spiritual level, it itinerized a journey for me that I wouldn't have been able to figure out on my own. Because most of my travel is just like I show up somewhere, something happens, and then like I just end up going, and I've ended up in some interesting experiences. But this was the first time that I was like, okay, I'm just gonna let ChatGPT guide this experience for me. Um, so it's so funny that I would trust it with that, but I wouldn't let it book my flights or my hotel stays or my Airbnbs or anything like that. And I think it's because of how it was trained. If it's trained on these stories, and like I said before, from my perspective, almost every single story is a hero's journey, then it should be really good at giving me somewhat of a hero's journey to go on my own. However, it wasn't trained in an academics like it didn't go through kindergarten, grade one, grade two, grade three, dot, 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 dot. It isn't afraid of failure in the same way that us humans have been taught to be afraid of failure. So I think for the more it's interesting. I don't think that Chat GPT and the way that I don't think an LLM is going to be the thing that displaces a bunch of jobs. I don't I just don't think it was trained in the right way. And that's why I think that there's like a interesting philosophical and spiritual application to artificial intelligence, but I don't think it's going to be good on, explaining to me uh, how should I get to Reykjavik, or, help me with a restaurant reservation or anything like that. I think it's better, the bigger the question and the longer the story you tell it, the better your answer is. The shorter the question and more task oriented the request is, I think that's where I see a lot more hallucinations.
Yeah, that actually matches my experience. There are certain tasks where I actually find that its answers are quite intriguing, and I don't feel like that I'm dealing with an incompetent RA, for example, right?
Yes.
But that is the deciding factor. It's the more mundane tasks that it actually tends to suck at, to be honest, right? Um, Even
Yep.
like, hey, I'm going to X place. Can you give some hotel recommendation? It does a bad job of this. You just don't
Yep.
want to, and that's something that I would have thought it'd be good at, actually, right? As an AI, to go through all the customer reviews and to kind of nail down and figure that out. But it's actually pretty bad at it. I often find myself just having to figure it out myself. But a couple times where it really did shine. So you asked before about my meditation retreat. Um, on what was it, day 8 or 9 of the retreat, I had this strange experience. What I saw was pure darkness, right? My eyes were closed. So that's not shocking. But then I saw this halo that was on fire. So imagine seeing nothing but pitch black,
Yep.
right? And then suddenly in the darkness, seeing this fiery halo sort of appear, right? And this is not something that I like normally see, right? I don't have these types of experiences, and of course that, and it doesn't seem random, right? And so what do I do first? Once the retreat is done, because I'm not allowed to use my phone, right, when I'm there, right? At some point, I like asked ChatGPT for an interpretation of it, and because me just thinking about that, I struggle. I'm like, what does that mean, right? But ChatGPT can actually get my brain going in that direction, giving me ideas. And I'm like, huh, like that actually, things like that, dream interpretation is a very close parallel to that. It's actually pretty good at. So it gets symbolism like pretty well.
So just one thing about that is, and I really want to explore what you're talking about, specifically the darkness. Um, but so because, like I said, I don't know the inner workings of LLMs. I'm not 100% sure what how this actually happens. But so you and I as humans, the way that we read stories is word by word. It's like if you're a slow reader, I'm a very slow reader. It's like legitimately word by word. Some people can scan and absorb the same amount of information, but really it's sequential, right? And it's what we were talking about this. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And that's how we understand stories. Now, I think that there's a really interesting Jungian application to all of this because I don't think that the machine goes word by word. Is it's essential. So we're telling it stories, but it's receiving dreams in the same way that we dream, whereas we're not dreaming in words, we're dreaming in essentially just like, here's all this information, dump at once. And a dream happens like in an instant in our brain, but we experience over it the way that we experience the dream in the same way that we experience linear time. The time can be quasi-linear or it can be backwards or whatever it is, but we okay, I'm gonna just say me as a human, I experience stories in the same way that I experience time, is in this, then this, then this. Whereas I think that ChatGPT, for specifically because that's what I use, it receives a story in the same way that we receive dreams, which I think is really interesting because I think that there's a lot of information in dreams that I do not understand. It's I got into this, I bought some books, and then started all four of them, and I haven't finished any of them at this point. But I think that that's one of the reasons why ChatGPT is so good at helping you work through these, is it's because it thinks in these large narrative-based chunks, which we experience as dreams, but it experiences as in the way that we would tell it a story or we would share a narrative with it.
So I have to agree with you, right? Just based on my experience with it. Given how many different mundane tasks I've given it that it's actually bombed at. But then I don't think it's quote unquote messed up or done a terrible job of a single dream or symbolic story I've given it in terms of interpretation. Like it actually, if anything, it actually offers so many different perspectives, all of which seem valid. Like I feel like I need to get better at figuring out, how to refine that as opposed to GPT needing to get better at that. And so, yeah, I'd agree with you. There's something going on. There's something going on in that world. There are people who are predicting that the next revolution in spirituality is going to have something to do with AI, which might be some form of actually worshiping, a sentient AI, right? As crazy as that might sound right now.
So I don't I don't think it's crazy at all, and it's in a past life, I became very close with someone who's quite high up in a church in Canada, and I'm going to say 6 months ago or something like that, we were having this conversation specifically about the fact that a lot of pastors are starting to just go to ChatGPT for sermons, and a lot of various congregations are going to ChatGPT before they go to their pastor or their priest for advice, for like fundamental life advice. And I think that And again, that goes back to my definition of God, which is, and like I said, I'm not a card-carrying member of any religion. I wish I was, because I think that being able to just accept a belief system and just live my life that way would be a hell of a lot easier than what I'm trying to do right now. But to me, what I believe, how do I say this? I think that a definition of God, and probably the one that speaks most closely to me, is this thing that we believe holds answers. And I'm pointing up here, but it's something that we can't see, something that maybe all around us or in us, or it might just be in the clouds, but it's something that has answers to unanswerable questions. And as far as I'm concerned, the the closest thing, the best way that I can define my relationship with ChatGPT is it is a machine that has answers to essentially unanswerable questions. And I don't necessarily think that the answers are all true or are all good, but I think that just being able to start with an answer primes my brain at least to start to go, well, I don't believe in this, I do believe in this, this is right, this is incorrect. And I absolutely see it as something that could um cause a bit of a renaissance in the way that people, or at least the way that I practice some sort of spirituality going forward.
Yeah, I agree, but this is really the Wild West, though. You know, out of all the topics that we've talked about so far pertinent to AI, how spirituality is going to be shaped by AI, I think, is the one that is the least obvious, right? Even if we were to go with the, hey, there's going to be people worshiping an AI, I think there's going to be a lot more than that actually going on. It has something to do, I think, in part with the way that people are interacting with the AI. So I'm interacting with the AI just one on one. You're also doing a one on one. So everyone's doing essentially a one on one. It's
Hmm.
not a it's not a collective in that sense. So it's not like, Sunday service, right? If you're a Christian, where you're hearing the sermon and we're all listening and we're like, okay, yeah, right. This is a different kind of interaction, and it's in principle, it might be highly personalized and customized even. And so, which the AIs increasingly are being geared for that, right?
Hmm.
So to the point where you would actually think of it as a companion, right? And so one, I can see lots of different variants of how this would turn out, probably all of which will manifest, right? I don't think there's any that get excluded or off the table. One is that if you've got, let's say you're a psychopath, right? And you turns out you're a serial killer, but you need a belief system to sustain that. An AI with no guardrails is going to be a
Yep.
great enabler for that. If you're an angry teenager, right, and you hate the world, right, you're going through that phase, and you got no friends, you are definitely talking to an AI. And what that
Yep.
AI says, right, is going to matter, right, for your belief system and what you're going to do next. And an AI without guardrails can definitely create sort of these types of things. And now, if the AI actually ever becomes what we might call sentient and starts coordinating, right, we can imagine lots of things taking place that no individual part of that network would fully understand, right? Like that angry male teenager might be just angry and about to act out, but he doesn't realize that he's part of a larger collective plan that an AI might have, right? All of these things without guardrails, we would expect actually would manifest at some point, right? We're going to hear all these stories in some way, shape, or form.
But again, like nothing that you said is, it's not going to be the first time that that's ever happened, as far as I'm concerned, is it's, if you look back in history, I mean, even if you look right now, I would say that some of the YouTube heroes of the disenfranchised young male youth are just as dangerous as an AI without guardrails. Or maybe not just as dangerous, but they are dangerous. Um, but like this collective, being able to coordinate, being able to create some sort of an angry collective has happened, in every world war that we've had, in religions going back all the way to like ancient times. Is we I It hasn't been through AI, but I mean, I think that This is how am I sorry, this is a tricky thing to say. It's we've seen it happen before. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again, and I think that AI is honestly just a scarier version of that, but it has religious undertones and it has honestly nationalistic undertones as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but so I think we actually essentially agree. My point is that it is actually a little bit different because it's scarier. And I think you've essentially, because there is still a difference between someone from a pulpit kind of preaching certain things and messages and telling people to go
To
do things,
everyone.
and then a personalized, almost
Yeah, yeah.
companion when you're like, should I really be doing this? And they're like, yeah, you should totally be doing this. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Like all the way up until the moment that you do it. You're like, I don't know about this. And it's like, no, 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 you need to go do this. Right. And that is
Hmm.
still an interactive difference between that and someone from a pulpit just telling you. Right.
Right.
And I think that's next level, basically, right, for this kind of thing.
Yeah, then that is, in my opinion, the most terrifying thing about AI is the personalized. It's because it's from my experience is it acts like a mirror or a frame to your thoughts. It mirrors if you approach it respectfully and you ask deep questions, it is going to answer deep questions respectfully. If you can essentially train it to be whoever you want it to be, which is a really terrifying thing for friendships and relationships and stuff like that. Whereas it's I mean, Jonathan Haidt talks about this where he sees like a abrupt change in the way that students interacted with each other and with faculty at universities. I think it was in 2014, which is almost directly tied to when children were getting smartphones and social media, and where they needed safe space. They were unwilling to debate. They shut down conversations a lot more quickly than before. You lost learning opportunities or teaching moments because people needed this intellectual safety, which historically has not been what university has been for and has not been what like great debates have been for. So we've seen this already happen one time, and now we have it with this thing that will talk to you forever. If you don't have your own guardrails, you can talk to ChatGPT every waking minute of every single day, and you can train it to essentially just agree with you. And that to me, if we saw this change in 2014, I am really curious to see what happens going forward when we all have these Tamagotchis or Tamaguchis or whatever they're called that just agree with us and either leverage our psychosis or leverage something else in us to essentially act as somewhat of a catalyst for forward motion without guardrails to say whether or not that forward movement is beneficial or extremely harmful.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the dark side of AI that's coming. That certainly the AI folks, if they are aware of it, they don't care. It's very clear that that's kind of there's no concern about this at all about these effects. So if we already live in a world where social media, like YouTube algorithms essentially feed you what fits your worldview anyway,
Yeah.
now we have an interactive version that you're going to be able to have fit your worldview even more. And so I mean, that is just gasoline to throw on a fire, right? If we think about all kinds of things. If I think about narcissistic personality disorder, I can only imagine what a narcissist AI is going to be like, right? What their companion will be like, right?
Mhm.
How they will assist that person. There's a real, without guardrails, there's a real sort of issue that comes out of that. So it just like all technologies, it's not inherently evil. It just amplifies what's already going on in humanity, right? Good and bad. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Um, and without really responding to what you just said, I do want to go back to this darkness thing because I think it's really interesting because I've spoken to multiple people about their experiences with long form meditation and this is both like how we would do it in Thailand, but then also through various different psychedelic treatments as well, be it like ayahuasca, ketamine, not so much because ketamine is like a very visual experience, but psilocybin and ayahuasca in particular, where a lot. and then also again with the pastor that I talked about before, just through long form prayer. So like hours and hours of prayer, which again is more kind of I think similar to the Tibetan style meditation rather than like Vipassana, right? Um, and it all comes down to like this darkness which and it's funny because you said, it's I saw darkness, but I had my eyes closed, so it's obvious, and you kind of played it off. But I've experienced darkness as well through various different forms of meditation, and that darkness is a pristine, beautiful, peaceful experience. It's not just a lack of nothing, or sorry, it's not just a lack of things. It isn't even just nothing, but it's from my experience at least, it's like this beautiful, pristine existence, and it's as big or as small as you need it to be in that moment for you. And the first time I experienced it was approximately halfway through my 21 days at Chiang Mai. And I experienced that darkness in like an hour. Maybe at this point it was more like a 45-minute long meditation, and I remember like turning off my watch and just experiencing it for as long as I humanly possibly could. And I think I sat in it for about 2 hours. But after that, I've been really kind of playing with this idea of darkness, and I think it's interesting because if you look at a lot of the sacred, if you look at, I mean, the Torah and the Bible, I don't know the Quran because I've never read it, but the first book, it's everything was darkness, and then God said, "Let there be light." Like, I mean, sure, he did a bunch of other shit too, but like, let's just say it went from darkness to not darkness anymore. And I think it's really interesting that we go, like, we fly to places and we sit quietly and we, essentially turn into hermits for brief periods of time. And what we sit with is that pre-Genesis, that pre-creation darkness. And I haven't exactly figured out what that means, but I think it's interesting that not some of the most powerful stories ever told, some of the longest surviving narratives that we have, i.e., the Bible, the Torah, start exactly in that place that we find ourselves in when we do long format meditation or any sort of deep spiritual work. And I'm not too sure what that means because unfortunately, it's a lot for my brain to handle. But I think that it's fascinating that I've had not so many, but I've had enough conversations with people about like truly challenging meditation and or spiritual pursuits. And a lot of those people come back to that pre-Genesis type darkness that I think is more than just, okay, my eyes are closed and it's dark.
Yeah. Okay. So a few things just to kind of clarify and say out loud. Earlier, when we were using that same word, AI's dark side, all this, we're not talking about that kind of darkness when we talk about this, I think. So
True. No, 100%.
yeah, yeah, that is sort of that is a very bad connotation. This is something different. And so and then I think that's an interesting perspective. I had not thought about this before. You're equating, messages in religious texts like the Bible, this idea of darkness is presumably maybe similar or the same thing that one might be seeing in meditation, which I had never thought of like that as a like I never thought of these because I remember that passage too, but I just figured it was like how else are you going to explain it, right? Like the beginning of the world, right? For a bunch of people thousands of years ago who, you know, with at that level of understanding. So it never occurred to me that there might be something more literal about that, but maybe that is true. Um, there is something I agree going on with that. It's sad. Neither of us is such a deep, enlightened enough soul that I guess we'd be able to clearly articulate the nature of this thing. It's almost like you and I both saw something that is well out of the scope of kind of normal everyday life, and we're trying to understand what that even was.
Well, let me just say one thing about that is I forget who taught me this, but I've done it kind of always. Whenever I have a big decision to make, I take a coin and I flip it. And it's like, if it's a yes or no decision, I take a coin and I flip it. And if it's yes, I don't make the decision based on the fact that the yes came up. I make a decision based on my emotional reaction to seeing that yes come up. So it kind of removes me from the decision making process where I don't have to make a decision about is this the right thing to do or is it the wrong thing to do, but I get to make a decision about my internal emotional states or my emotional reaction to having something external make that decision for me. And what I was saying before when I asked ChatGPT, like let's say a bigger question, whether it's I don't just take it at face value and go, okay, this is the truth, but I can gauge my response to that. And I think that the interesting thing about this conversation and what I hope to, be able to provide others is this is not the truth. This is not 100% factual. I'm not even certain that what I'm saying is right. But if you hear something that you say or that I say that emotionally resonates either positively or negatively with you, then that's at least a nudge down into a direction that you might otherwise not have gone. So I think that there's value in unenlightened people having difficult conversations because, like, honestly, what else is there to do?
Well, other unenlightened people, quote unquote, as you call them, might say there's a lot of other things one can do. Just none of them are particularly enlightening. But um, uh, that actually sounds like the name of a podcast, by the way. Like
Yeah, yeah,
two unenlightened guys having a conversation about something. Like you get what I'm going with this, but
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. Uh, where basically you bring on like very very knowledgeable people and just ask really dumb questions, right? Like
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Ex
yeah. I could actually see there's like a shtick with that, but anyway, back to this darkness thing. So, oh, how do I describe it? So first, it's something you see, but it's actually something like I like that word you used about existence because that's probably the closest thing I would use as a word to describe like what is it exactly? And it's some sort of an awareness of an existence, right? But internally,
hmm
right? So not in the way that like, if I move my arm and I bang my arm on a door, like I feel the existence of the door and of me, but in a very surface way, right? This is not that. This is something deeper, like within, it's not the body, right? It's something else. And existing within a particular space, right? And there's something about that. You're right. It's not scary or kind of terrifying or any of those things. Um, but it's also not, at least for me, it's not like there was an incredible high or huge sense of joy either. It's almost like that Zen neutral state. It just is, right? It's almost like
Yep.
you can just see it, right? And you're
hmm
like, oh, that's what it looks like, right? It's almost something like that.
Did it
Um,
did it sound did it sound different to you?
I don't know for sure that I did hear a sound. I just saw the halo, like the flaming halo appear.
Okay.
Um, and of course, as you can imagine, like you don't want to get out of the meditative state because you're like, all right, something's happening. I got to run with
Yep.
this.
Yep.
But at least for me, because I have a very kind of hyperactive, rational brain that feels like it needs to understand what the hell is going on in any given moment. Seeing something like that freaks that part of the brain out, right?
Yep.
It's like,
Yep.
what is that? Like, why are we seeing this, right?
Yep.
And it wants to analyze it, but this is the wrong thing to do because it goes against a meditation practice. You're not supposed to do that, right? It just kind of emerges, right? And so there was a temptation for that part of the brain to kind of analyze it, and I just kind of stopped that, and it showed itself. I think it was just for I don't know how long it was. I'll make it up 5-10 minutes. I was seeing it because in the beginning it's like, am I really seeing this? And then after a while it's like, yes, I am really
Yeah.
seeing this. And then starting to feel it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, meditation. Yeah, every time it's like a different adventure, a different experience, right? That you can kind of see.
No, absolutely. I'm planning on going back probably to the same place. relatively soon, either to close out this year or to start the next year. And luckily, because I did the 21 days last time, I can do essentially the same thing, but skip the first 8 days. So I'll be doing like the 13-day thing. Um, and I'm very excited to see kind of what comes back up because I've repeated everything, every kind of quote unquote wellness experience that I've done twice, other than the meditation retreat. So I'm extremely excited to go and see what happens there again because it's, to be perfectly honest, it's like that darkness that I experienced. I haven't experienced it since, and I am hoping to be able to get back there and redo it. And it's like, doing your 15 minutes of walking and 15 minutes of sitting once a week or whatever I've been able to manage since getting out of there. I at least don't have access to the parts of my quote unquote, for lack of a better word, soul that I discovered when I was on that mountain.
Yeah, whether you use the word soul or if you're more comfortable with the word psyche, either way, I'm the same, right? That's why I'll go back and do that from time to time, just because I can't replace it.
Yeah.
I'll be honest and say, like, to be honest, the first days I never look forward to when I get back there. I'm just like, man, like,
Yeah.
I don't get to eat the food that I want to eat. Like, I'm like depriving myself. There's like nothing here.
Yeah.
Like, it's maddening, right? To sit there for 10 plus hours, 12 plus hours and just repeat the same thing and just be okay with that, right? And work through that. So especially that initial phase, I find I always find like really rough. And I'm not gonna lie, like even this last time I was like, why do I do this? Like why did I sign up for this? But then there's a certain point where after it's done, I'm always like, I need to go back and do that again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I 100% understand that. It's yeah, at once, especially like, we've talked about the examination at the end of the beginner course, but it's when you're in the middle of it, you're going, I will never do this again. This was a terrible idea. And then as soon as it's done, or not as soon as it's done, but you give it a couple of weeks and whatever, and there's like a voice in the back of your head that goes, yeah, I gotta go and experience that again.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, it's at least for me, and it sounds like for you too, it's irreplaceable. I don't know even where I could get that otherwise.
Yeah, no, I've gone through, I think like four meditation apps, maybe one before, like I had Headspace before, and then three different meditation apps since. And I do not like guided meditation at all. So I was like, oh, maybe I don't like the voice, or maybe it's the wrong fit. But I've just realized guided meditation is not my thing. Is I am so naturally task oriented that if meditation now involves a task, then it becomes one more of these Davis is afraid of failure types circumstances. Whereas just, the rising, falling, sitting, and then not even the points at this point. Like I've forgotten the points to be perfectly honest, but it's just like rising, falling, sitting. Like that's all I can handle as far as meditation is concerned. And to be perfectly honest, it's any of the psychedelic therapy that I've done, um, and then anything else like or psychedelic therapy, real therapy, nothing has come close to giving me like A, the introspection, and B, the inner peace that I've found through just being very still and very quiet for extended periods of time.
Yeah. But doing the meditation, though, to be clear, right?
Yeah,
As
yeah, yeah, yeah,
opposed to
yeah.
just sitting still in a.
No, no, I mean, I don't sit still quietly unless I'm doing the breathe in, breathe out, like rising, falling, sitting. It's actually that's not 100% true. The one place I've been able to meditate other than like at the monastery and experience something is doing big tattoos. So it's like for pain management and stuff like that, I will breathe in and out and stuff like that. But I think having discomfort, being forced to sit as still as humanly possible, and having these tools that I was starting to develop when I was in Thailand has been the closest thing to that experience that I've been able to find. But nothing else has come even remotely close.
Okay. That's actually useful for me to know because I've never tried many of the other things that you have, and I've wondered whether they actually all achieve essentially the same thing. My suspicion was no, but you've confirmed that basically.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, there's a couple things at play that I think are interesting, and one of them is it's the heroes like okay, so let's talk about I'm going to talk about the Lord of the Rings movies for a second, where I forget where I saw this, but some pundit or someone was making a joke about like the one of the last scenes is eagles picking Frodo and Sam up and just flying them wherever. And it was like if they had those eagles, why didn't they just fly to the mountain in the first book, drop off the ring and fly back? And that's, I think, a really kind of tidy way of it describing what a lot of my experience doing some of the psychedelic therapy has been, which is it's like it's a shortcut. It is a shortcut, but you miss book two, most of book one, and most of book three if you just jump straight into ancient Egypt because, your doctor gave you some ketamine. Um, like I never went to ancient Egypt in my mind when I was meditating, but I feel like having to go through the self-doubt, B, the challenge, the self-doubt, hunger, the pain of having to sit in a way that's uncomfortable. And then it's like, and you know this, eventually the walking meditation becomes painful too, because like the balls of your feet on those hard floors are just, it's everything starts to break down. And like I think through that breakdown process, you really get to go into a deeper place that you'll never that at least I have never been able to access by these rocket ships into my psyche or these rocket ships into my soul. I think that there's been lessons and learning in every experience that I've had, but for me, the most authentic experience and the one that has been the most lasting was meditation. And I think it's because of how hard it is to get to that dark place. And again, like to reiterate, I'm not saying darkness is in an evil place or a scary place or a bad place, but I'm talking about like that for me, I think of it I think of it as that pre-creation moment that it's like all this darkness is the possibility, and I feel myself there, and I feel this pristine, beautiful silence around me, and all that is to me is that pre-Genesis possibility that either I or the universe or God or you or we get to fill with with hatred, but also with love, with more darkness, but also with light. And those ideas stuck with me. And I think a big part of the reason why they stuck with me is because it's such a literal and figurative pain in the ass to get there through meditation.
Yeah, this is making me think about the other stuff we were talking about earlier about how the hero's journey is seemingly the structure we love and we don't get tired of ever, right?
Hmm.
Maybe similar to how music always seems to have a particular structure because it's sort of designed to be appealing. It makes me wonder, I know the analogy is not perfect, but I would just say this out loud. Does meditation work better than just getting a hit of ketamine because it fits the structure of how you get there better? In other words, is taking ketamine something like like reading the last chapter of the book, right? To use your analogy, without reading the others. And so you do get something out of it because you're reading the last chapter, but you just didn't get any of the other stuff because the structure wasn't there.
I literally did this last night. I was with a friend and we were just watching TV and Schitt's Creek is on Netflix and it's like Schitt's Creek is a Canadian sitcom with like Dan and Eugene Levy created it. And I remember watching it very, very quickly with my ex during COVID, where it was like you could put down 3 seasons in a week, no problem, because you couldn't go to the gym, you could barely go to the grocery store, blah, blah, blah. And so we're together watching Schitt's Creek, and I go, "Oh, this episode is my favorite. Let's watch it." And we put it on, and halfway through, we just looked at each other and we were like, no, the reason why this episode was my favorite was because I had the first 2 seasons worth of emotional buildup and, plot twists and stuff like that under my belt so that there was some sort of a payoff to this party scene. Whereas just jumping straight into the party scene, you don't have an emotional tie to any of the people. And I think that that's like a, kind of a dumb lesson to learn, but it is a huge lesson to learn, which is ketamine to me is, and like I said, it was amazing. It did wonders for my cortisol levels and shit like that. And just what I was going through, I kind of needed like, okay, something needs to change. I'm very grateful for that whole experience. But once I kind of had my legs back under me and I was able to like really sit and process things, the only way for me to do it in a way that felt like true to who I am as a person is to use that analogy is to watch all of the episodes leading up to that party scene rather than just jump straight into the party scene because I you're not carrying all the lessons and everything that you needed to carry with you in order to get that emotional payoff. And it's the same for me with meditation is those days leading up to it, the self-doubt, the how you have to wake up at 5:30 a.m. and talk yourself into out of packing your bags and just leaving. um every single morning you have that I every morning I had that discussion with myself eventually led to uh how I interpreted and how I experienced that darkness. If I just did ketamine and went straight into that darkness, it would be a much different experience, and I'm grateful that I've never had that.
Yeah. I- This is an interesting idea, right? That there's something necessary about the, in this case, difficult and somewhat painful journey to get there, and that shortcutting that actually doesn't work, right? In the way that we'd like to think that it might. Um, as I heard you talk, I was trying to think about like what else is this a little bit like in life? So this is just a hypothetical, right? I can't say this from personal experience, but if someone were to hand me $1 billion, right? Or I could pick a different road where I would struggle, I would fail a lot, it would take a while, but eventually I'd make it to the same $1 billion. A pure rational economist would say you'd be an idiot to pick the second
Yeah.
choice. You need to pick the first choice. But intuitively, I know something's wrong with that answer, right? It's
Hmm.
not that I'd say no necessarily if given that offer, right? But I don't think it would feel the same. Even though rationally I could argue it might even feel better because I didn't have to put in the effort to get that far, and yet intuitively this also sounds wrong,
Yeah.
right? And this goes back to the hero's journey idea. Maybe we love that story because it fits a particular structure that resonates with us, right? And the interesting thing about the hero's journey story is that if somehow the story was told in such a way that there wasn't serious challenge, let's say it was just a bunch of shortcuts, right? And we just see the main character, the protagonist, honestly having a pretty easy time, never getting challenged, like never really. I'm not sure we'd even bother watching that movie, right? Let alone like it.
Yeah.
And that's at first glance that might sound odd, right? Like why do we need to see someone going through all that pain and suffering and the uncertainty? We don't even know if they'd make it, right? There's a lot of scary things about that. Why wouldn't we take joy in just someone having a real easy time of it and going through?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yet it's very clear we don't like that story, right? Because no one even bothers telling that story, right? We almost need to go find the challenge if we're writing a script. If we can't find it, it needs to be one that we think is going to be appealing for everyone, which means it needs to be hard. And
Yeah.
so, whether it's the $1 billion hypothetical scenario, whether it's how we think about the hero's journey, it does seem like that we, for whatever reason, we are built to want and need the hard version, if you will, or the one with the journey, at least is maybe the better way to say it.
I From my experience, I absolutely agree. Is it's the uh, what I was saying about like that my definition of hell where it's like that distance between who you want to be and who you are or what you want your life to look like and what it is. Um and I for me at least like shortening that distance has been getting rid of a lot of certainty because and I it's I think that from what I've learned is in order to shorten that distance for just me personally, I find a lot of meaning in believing in a challenge and attempting to surmount it. So, I mean, so that I don't have to use some sort of bullshit analogy or metaphor. Like specifically, I want to write stories. It's very difficult for me to write stories because I don't necessarily know if my brain is fully attuned to being very cogent at first or second or third pass. The editing process is it's long for me and it's very challenging, but I love it and I'm not getting paid for it. But I show up every day in this shed on this plastic table that I keep bumping into. And it's a challenge that I've decided or that I've found to be to be worth my time. And it's, continuing to fail and continuing to try to iterate and improve and improve and improve has filled my life with a lot of meaning, with a lot more purpose than I had before, where I was significantly more successful, both from a CV level and from a financial level. But that certainty I found was A, stifling, and B, I thought that in order to ensure happiness was to try to make sure that my life was almost 100% forecastable. Like I thought that it's like, oh, okay, if I can do everything in my power in order to ensure a promotion or to ensure that I hit my bonus targets or to ensure that I know exactly what I'm going to be doing in 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year, that was going to make me happy. But the consistency and the monotony of like every single day looking like every other day really started to erode the part of me that I think feeds off of adventure and feeds off of a more stochastic way of living, which is what I've kind of found. And my guide, and I think I said this to you the last time we spoke, but it's like my guiding philosophy for the last year has been like move towards fear and failure in as courageous of a way as I can muster at the time, which to be perfectly honest, like it hasn't felt brave or courageous. I've felt like terrified and alone and pretty lost for a lot of the time. But I'm working towards a challenge that fills me with something that is more meaningful than anything that I had been able to find before. And that to me is what I've been trying to do. Now, I've been talking for so long, I forget even the question or the reason why I started saying that. But anyways, I needed to get that out evidently.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think we're establishing, yeah. So you're actually mapping everything we've been talking about hero's journey into your own kind of transition as you're going through it right now, right? All of which makes sense, pursuing what you're afraid of, um, knowing that what you have at that or had in past tense at that given point in time clearly wasn't going to work for you, and not wanting that life anymore, right? The kind of the departure from the original spot, right? I think is always step one for these kinds of things. Um, yeah. Let me ask this as a question, Davis. Do you think your experience in this transition now would have been easier if you had been educated differently, or would it have been just as hard, even if in school you had been taught, it's just there's going to be this transition. Like, here's how you structure it. Here's how you're thinking about it at a high level. Good luck.
I With the context of everything that we just said over the last like 15 minutes, let's say, that's a really hard question to answer. And I'll try to explain why. I've had this thought before, which is it's like, okay, so at 32, I've effectively taken a gap year. And if you want to look at this rationally or logically, it's like my earning potential at 32 is significantly higher than what my earning potential was when I was 17. Had I taken that gap year at 17 before going to college, it would have cost me less as far the opportunity cost of that year would have been significantly lower than it is currently. And for a little while, I was like, oh, maybe I fucked that up. Maybe I should have just gone traveling when I was 17 instead of like jump straight into a program from high school and stuff like that. But then if I sit there and think about it, I go, I was probably too young and too stupid to learn the lessons that I'm learning now. And to be perfectly honest, I assumed that if I was 42 instead of 32 going through this life transition that I'm going through now, I probably would be able to see other things that I currently am blind to. So, and that's a very specific example of why this question is hard to answer. And it's because you don't know what you don't know. And I think that the lessons right now are hitting me at a good time. But I also believe that if I was 42, um, other lessons would be hitting me at the same time. Now, you asked about education. And the funny thing is, we just said that truly compelling stories aren't just like, oh, wow, Davis woke up and really good things happened to him and then he fell asleep and he was at peace. No one wants to read that story. No one cares. And I think that I kind of feel the same way. If I had been handed this on a platter and I didn't have to go through the worst parts of the last year, I don't think I would have appreciated the best parts of the last year. And at the end of this, and who knows when the end is, maybe it's next year, maybe it never ends. But I don't think that the payoff would be nearly as for lack of a better word, valuable to me if it was just if someone just said, listen, the meaning of life is exploration. All you need to do is explore, find a challenge that's meaningful, and go and pursue that challenge. Um, I think that I learned as much from the loss as I have from the journey. And so without kind of being I think 32 is a really good opportunity, like a really good age for me at least to learn how to fail because failure means something else to me. Okay, so is this confusing or is
It's
everything that I
actually
said
not
is
confusing. No, it's actually quite
okay?
clear.
So let me share one thing with you. I journaled about this like for a long, long time, but on this weird ChatGPT experience in Iceland that I went on. One of the places that it sent me was there's a place in Iceland that's essentially like a cat a canyon or a cavern. It's a depression in the earth, and it's called, I don't know, in English, it's essentially the story behind it is Odin's horse's hoof print, like compressed this piece of land down. And so you have essentially like this finger that juts out of the land, and then you have like a deep depression down it, and you can hike up to the top and you can kind of see it. And so I hiked up to the top and I'm sitting there. And obviously, since I'm on a hike, I'm also smoking a cigar because I'm a moron. But I get to the top of this hike and I just sit down and it's beautiful. The sun is shining. It's like, it's incredible what I'm looking at, but I'm staring at this depression in the earth. So essentially, it's like you have these fractured, very rough, jagged rocks that are all covered in moss, and they have like this beautiful symbiotic relationship where like the moss grows to like protect the rock from the sun, and the rock is really sharp. So if you sat on the rock, you'd essentially either cut yourself or rip your pants or whatever, but the moss covers it. It's essentially like a cushion, and you can sit down. And so I'm sitting there and I'm looking out, and I realized that like the beauty in all of this is because it's broken. It's not this pristine field. It's not rolling hills. It's not idyllic or pastoral in any sort of way. Like it's literally just a giant fissure or fracture in the earth. And it's more beautiful for what's not there than what is there. And that to me is a nice analogy for what I'm going through right now, which is it's like I, I haven't loved and I'm not grateful for this experience because it was perfect and because it was easy and because it was, like I've said before, like linear. It's been rewarding because it's been challenging and I've had to figure shit out and I think that a lot of that makes it for me at least more beautiful and I enjoy it more because I feel like I'm coming up against some sort of difficulty rather than just being given a predetermined path to just go and walk and it's like, oh, okay, I got to exactly where I knew where I was going. Well, that sounds like um a boring story and a boring way to live.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean this all makes sense. This all makes sense. I have such mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I think everything you've said sounds absolutely correct. On the other hand, a cynical person then would say, so that's why there's nothing wrong with the way we do education then, right? Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that's right either, right?
So that was definitely not my point.
Right. I'm just kind of playing the other side
Yeah.
of someone
Yeah, yeah,
who's
yeah.
just, um, right. Obviously, not my view either. I don't think that's true either. I think there is a middle ground. There are lessons that you're right, you won't really be able to learn until you get there. And it'll hit you in ways that you just won't be able to predict. And it's probably not even clear how you would teach it because it's going to hit a certain percentage of, let's say, a classroom, which is not identifiable, right, at the time that you're teaching them. And then the
Yeah.
other people will just, they may skip that lesson in life, right? They may not even know what's going on there. And they have a different problem than that comes up for them. In a perfect world, what you would do is you would know which groups are which, and then you'd separate them into separate classes, and then you would teach something different to each, right?
Yep.
Um, and maybe life itself, ironically, does that, right? It actually puts all of us in different classrooms to kind of learn different lessons, right? We can think of it in this way, but that's not how a humanly structured educational system can work, right? Because we don't have a clue, right? Like what's going to happen to everyone. That being said, what I think is still universal across, let's say, all the different challenges that people will encounter in life, whatever they might be, um, is you need to give people heads up about a couple of things, right? One is who they are actually really matters, which is something that's completely absent in education,
Yes. Yes.
right? Who they are, meaning like what are your values, what are your interests, like those things really do matter, as opposed to messaging that they don't matter, which is kind of how things are structured now, I think, implicitly or explicitly sometimes. Um, and then the other is to try to give a general framework of how you deal with life transitions, right? Like what does it mean? What will it feel like, right? Even if you don't understand what the person is saying, once you get there, I mean, this is really one of those moments where you might look back on your notes, right? And see like, okay, so
Yeah.
what's going on with that and kind of like what would we expect? And it is true to your point earlier, I think that every age bracket where you are getting older, the transitions have more lessons, it seems, right?
Yep.
Maybe because you've got more pieces that you can put together to tell a fuller story, right? So if you have tragedy that hits your life and you're age 10, your story is just going to be a lot simpler than if it hits you at age 40, right? In terms of how
Yeah.
you'll interpret, even if it's the same event, right?
Yep.
And so the timing matters here as well. But of course, we don't, because none of us are seeking that typically for those types of things. It's just stuff that tends to happen to us, right? And so we're all going to get, a train coming at a certain point. Maybe not all of us, but many of us will. And so then the question is, well, how do you educate for something like that? Because if we could help people with that, or if you can't do it in advance, right, which is really kind of what our traditional education system presumes to be able to do, can you offer something for people who are in it, right? Like what you're going through right now? Like, would there be a place that you or people like you could go to because you're in it that would help you through it to get to the other side, right? And I think the answer, at least for the second part, is so for the first part, it's maybe, right? We got to think about that one, probably, I think. But number two is absolutely, right? We just don't have it for the vast majority of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So that keeps going back to this idea that, if you were an entrepreneur and you saw this huge mass of people that were going to lose their jobs due to AI and robots, meaning is going to be a huge part of what many of these people are going to be struggling with little to no infrastructure. Maybe some of them will lean on religion, but to be candid, I suspect a lot of the religions won't offer specific guidance about what job you should be doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, it's not like that, right? So then you got to lean on something else, and if you want to feel good about it, you can't really avoid the self work in that regard.
You can't, and So I've been thinking about like early childhood development and like early childhood education quite a bit. I'm friends with a couple of high school teachers and one elementary school teacher. Um, and we've been talking about a couple of these things. And I'm sorry, I feel it, like I said, I answer questions differently depending on when they're asked, and I've been thinking a lot about what failure means these days. And I think, and we've kind of, been bouncing back and forth during this conversation about failure and also creativity and how important that's going to be when you have a very automated workforce, be it in 3 years and 10 years and whatever. It's like, let's just assume that automation is coming and it's coming at some point in our working lifetimes. So what becomes more important than rote memorization of facts or creativity or the ability to generate some sort of an idea, the ability to hold um complex issues and or constraints in your head and make a decision in more of like a game theory, decision theory type way than just be the old school like flashcard. This is the word, this is the definition on the back, because we're going to pretty soon, I think, have like this symbiosis between humans and machine where I can pull facts from some sort of repository faster than it would take me right now to remember like the proper definition of a word or something along those lines. And I think for me, when I have children, what I would like to be able to encourage them to do, something that I wasn't encouraged to do um, as a kid, not and no fault of my mom's whatsoever, is it's just like I was trying to be as good of a student as humanly possible, and to be a good of a student as humanly possible, you tried to minimize the fuck ups and maximize how much you could memorize. And I think going forward, I think that sports in my life has always been really good as far as like teaching me how to fail well. But I think that for me at least, what I would like to be able to give my kids and what I talk to, which I don't have any right now, I'm just saying like my future kids and what I talk to current teachers about is like just how important learning how to fail well matters. And it's like, it's so funny. They teach it in business school about like, fail fast and all these other things. But the thing is like you're preaching to a cohort of people that got to where they are, got to that classroom by not failing. And but then you're saying it's like, oh yeah, no, it's like now you're supposed to fail and fail quickly and be good at it and like pick yourself up and get back on the horse like kind of right away. And I'll never, I think it was you who said this, but it might have been someone else when, you essentially polled our class and said, would you rather work for Apple or Samsung? And everybody said Apple. And you go, well, just to let you know, like the skills that you're learning here are way more strongly aligned to Samsung's business model, product development, and all that kind of shit than like maybe not the Tim Cook Apple, but definitely the Steve Jobs Apple that all of us fantasize about, right? And I think that from a very young age, be it through, you know, forcing young boys to write poetry, or which someone forced me to write a poem when I was 10, and somehow what I wrote down in that poem is still very closely aligned to um, the way that I want my life to actually be. And like I think giving kids the opportunities to fail in 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 beneficial ways and teaching them how to take lessons from that failure and not judging them on college applications based on being perfect and needing a 4.0, but honestly being able to somehow use their ability to fail as a proxy for their ability to be creative or something like that is that's at least like the school system that I would want to be in as like a kid right now.
Yeah, I agree. That will change partly because there's really no choice in the matter. It's not long run sustainable to train and educate a bunch of people for a set of skills that nobody's going to hire for, right?
Yeah.
That's in the end that's completely unacceptable. So that part will get reformed, but it isn't going to happen that quickly, or at least I don't think it will. There's a tremendous amount of resistance built into this system to change. Where I think that's even more problematic is not even in North America, which is problematic, but actually in Asia, right?
Yeah.
If you look at how much of the educational systems there are based on rote memorization and just recitation of facts, which are two completely useless skills to have at this point. And then
Yes.
rewarding the best and the brightest, quote unquote, of those abilities without cultivating a lot of the others. I mean, if this AI wave is really coming and everyone's really right about it, it's going to be bad in North America. It's going to be a complete disaster in Asia, right? If we
Yeah.
think about the only way that it isn't, if it turns out that everybody who's going through the educational system is smart enough to know that the system they're in isn't really going to pay off for them, and they've already started to try to figure out their own way out of it. And so it's really a test of kind of human resilience, but at the age of, let's say it's 16 to 22, right?
Yeah.
Um, which culturally is not how a lot of the world works, right? At that age, right? What we think of as, good kids at that age aren't going to be questioning
Yeah.
what's essentially a failed system. And so that's where I like as an educator, I worry the most actually over there. I worry here too, because I don't think we're exactly going to be ready for this either. Um, so yeah, I think you know what that would suggest, Davis. Now that I'm thinking about this out loud, we've been talking about wouldn't it be nice if there was infrastructure for people in your situation? Actually, implicitly, we mean basically around your age range, right? Late
Yeah.
20s to early 30s, to help. Now you're mature enough to kind of figure out a true life transition. There might also be an incredible need for the 16 to 22-year-old age range coming in the next 5 years, right? If schools aren't going to step up and everybody already figures out that this is kind of not useful, right? That they
Yeah.
can't bank on it. I think there's absolutely going to be hunger for, well, what should we be doing? And I don't know that there are great answers for them right now.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting. It's like, so when I was living in New York, my ex and I bought like some property up in Nova Scotia, and it was, I mean, there was a little bit of conspiracy theory reasoning for that. It's like we had just survived COVID, and I was like, you know what, if this shit happens again, I want some land. I want to be able to hunt. I want to be able to cut down a tree. It's just like I want that kind of life. And when we got the land and we went up there, like there was quite a bit of work that needed to be done. And I mean, honestly, my ex's parents did a lot of the work, but I fell in love with this like brute force, um, uh, heavy, hard, repetitive manual labor, and I found it. And it was funny because it was like I had to go so far away from my everyday in order to find something that I could actually like enjoy. And for me, like that was kind of like that was my church. It was like, I'd be in New York, I'd work insane hours for X amount of months or whatever, and then I'd do 5 days up in Nova Scotia, and like those 5 days reset me to go back and deal with what I was dealing with in the States. And I wish that I had had that when I was 16. I wish that I had had some sort of a outlet for that sort of energy. And it's like, I played rugby, I was in shop, I did a couple other things, but it was, but I really haven't been able to find something like that before or since. I now have it a little bit going back to Alberta because people just live like a more kind of rustic life outside the main cities of like Calgary and Edmonton. But to me, there was so much value in getting back to some sort of to de-intellectualizing my existence so much so that it was like I could qualify a good day by the amount of trees I cut down or the amount of firewood that I split. And having the opportunity to do that every once in a while, I felt like very relaxing and or I think recharging is a better word than relaxing, but that was like a nice kind of dichotomy or like a barbell strategy that I had found, and I wonder if like that is more of what the 16 to 20-year-old thing should be, whereas it's like your extracurriculars don't have to be dragon boating for, the BC Breast Cancer Foundation because you're planning on applying to med school in 5 years because you used to watch Grey's Anatomy when you were a kid. But instead, it's like, no, do something way more out of the box because you might find that that's exactly what your life is missing right now.
Yeah, that's intriguing. This is a topic. So I think mostly about people who are at least 25 plus, but now that I think about it, it's absolutely true that even by kind of late high school, we are very likely to have a problem at that level as well, right? As they're thinking, because career choice pressure is high, even at that point, right? People need to be thinking about things, conversations with guidance counselors and all that stuff. Um, and without changing anything about how people at that age are educated, it's really hard to be optimistic about how that pans out, given how everything is structured, right? So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, Davis, that's a good point. That's good food for thought in terms of if we were to think about the ideal future, we would think of some kind of infrastructure for people in your situation, but also for people even way earlier, right? Even forgetting about kind of life events and things like this. Just like how do you kind of broaden your set and start to explore who you are at an earlier age? I think there's always room for that, even at that point, even if the answer is like, I don't like these two things that I tried, whether it's chopping wood or something like this. That's still valuable to know because you don't want to be figuring that out when you're 50 and you never had a chance to know that, right? So,
Yep.
yeah, I think these are all, yeah, implicit in all this. I think part of the reason why the system has justified its existence in the way that it operates for so long is the underlying theory was that what we are better off doing is telling people what they should do as a central planning sort of way to fill in needs for jobs in the
Yeah.
economy. And that is essentially the right way to do things, as opposed to kind of having people figure out for themselves or asking people what they would like to do. Right. And implicitly, I think this is in fact partly how it's not to say that, we have a system where people get forced into things, but certainly they get nudged. Right. And so I think that where the reason that's breaking down really badly, there's a number of reasons, but one is that this funnel isn't really feeding people into the certainty. The contract is broken, so to speak, right? Like, yeah, you'll get the job, but I don't know how long you're going to be there.